The Jaffa-Jerusalem Railway is a railway that connected Jaffa and Jerusalem. The line was built in the Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem by the French company Société du chemin de fer Ottoman de Jaffa and Jerusalem Prolongements, and inaugurated in 1892, after previous attempts by the British Jewish philanthropist Sir Moses Montefiore failed. While the first rail track in the Middle East was laid elsewhere, the line is considered to be the first Middle Eastern railway. The line was originally built at 1000 mm meter gauge, later rebuilt to 1050 mm and then to 1435 mm standard gauge. The line was operated by the French, the Ottomans and after World War I, the British. After its closure in 1948, it was reopened as the Tel Aviv-Jerusalem Railway by Israel Railways. History. Early proposals. Sir Moses Montefiore spoke of establishing a railway between Jaffa and Jerusalem in 1838. He met with Culling Eardley, who was also interested in the project, but stated that he would not be part of it if religious institutions would be involved. In 1856, he contacted the British Prime Minister, Lord Palmerston, and discussed the construction of a railway. Temple supported the plan, commenting that it would benefit both Britain and Turkey. A meeting was organized with the Ottoman Grand Vizier Ali Pasha upon his visit to London on May 20, 1856, where an agreement on the principles was signed. As a result, Lawrence Oliphant, an author and businessman who became a Member of Parliament in 1865, also put his force behind the project. On December 8, 1856, Count Prolongements, also involved in the project, sent a message from Istanbul that the Ottoman government was not willing to provide land for the construction, and the project withered. In 1856, General Francis Rawdon Chesney travelled to Palestine to survey the land for a railway in the company of Sir John McNeill, a railway expert. After examining two possible routes, he deemed a rail line to Jerusalem too expensive, estimating construction costs at £4,000–4,500 per kilometre. McNeill then proposed a short line from Jaffa to Lydda only, and a macadam road from the to Jerusalem. Chesney did not give up contacting Sir Arthur Slade, a general in the Ottoman army, who supported the plan for a railway in what is today Iraq. Slade opposed a Jaffa-Jerusalem line, which he believed would benefit England and be against Turkey's interests. Although Montefiore was involved in it, nothing came of Chesney's initiative. According to another account, Montefiore backed out of the project when Culling Eardley reiterated during a meeting that the railway would serve Christian missionary activity. On his fifth visit to the Holy Land in 1857, Montefiore brought with him a British railway engineer who proposed the construction of the railway along the Rephaim stream, to reduce construction costs and to allow the railway to be close to a source of water. He lost interest in the project in 1862, however, when his wife died on Rosh Hashanah. In 1864, the German-American engineer Charles Franz Zimpel proposed building several railways in the Syrian province to the Ottoman authorities, that would allow the start of construction if Zimpel would be able to gather the necessary funds within half a year. In 1865, Zimpel published a pamphlet with his own survey of the region, including a French-language map of the planned route, which was very similar to the route used today. The main differences were two sections near Jaffa and Ramla, changed from the original plan for convenience, that lengthened the line by about 6.5 kilometers. Zimpel spent a year in Constantinople attempting to gain a concession for the railway's construction, to no avail. The German architect and city engineer Konrad Schick, a Jerusalem resident, later published a similar booklet, where he also detailed his own proposal for a railway, which called for a line through Ramallah and Beit Horon. A route along the lines of Schick's plan was for a long time considered the most viable, and French engineers conducted an extensive survey to that end in 1874–75. The concept of a railway to Jerusalem was also thought of by the American writer James T. Barclay. He envisioned a line from El Arish Ascalon to Gaza. Another proposal was made by the engineer Human, who surveyed the area, suggested in 1864 that it would be wise to create a railway to Jerusalem. Because of perceived British interest in the project, France and Austro-Hungary also became interested. The Ottoman Empire rejected Montefiore's plan on the assumption that it would mainly serve Christian missionary interests. Nevertheless, the local press reported on the proposed railway in 1872 and praised the Turkish Sultan for his efforts to promote its construction. The original failure of the Western powers to construct the railway is attributed to the unwillingness of the respective Western governments to allocate funds for the project. Despite the political interest, financing the man principally responsible for actually constructing the railroad was Joseph Navon, a Jewish entrepreneur from Jerusalem. Navon began to investigate the possibility of constructing a railway in 1885. His advantage over earlier proposers of a railway was that as an Ottoman subject, Navon's chief partners and endorsers included his cousin Joseph Amzalek, the Greek-Lebanese engineer George Frangier, and the Swiss Protestant banker Johannes Fruiger. Navon spent 3 years in Constantinople to promote the project and obtain a permit from the Ottoman Empire. On October 28, 1888, he received a 71-year concession from the Ottoman authorities that also gave him permission to extend the line to Gaza and Nablus. He also paid 5,000 Turkish lira to the Ottomans, and agreed to receive no financial guarantees. Lacking the capital to proceed, Navon went to Europe in 1889 to find a buyer for the concession, and failed to do so both in England and Germany. Bernard Camille Collers, a French lighthouse inspector, bought it for £1,000,000. On December 29, 1889, the Jaffa to Jerusalem Railway Company was founded in Paris with Collers as the first director. The total share capital was £4,000,000 in 8,000 shares. Navon sat on the board of directors, which mostly consisted of French investors. The company raised 14 million francs, of them 9,795,000 francs from Christian religious followers. Construction was carried out by the Parisian Company for Public Works and Construction, at a cost of 10 million francs, and was to be completed by April 1, 1893. Gerald Eberhard, from Switzerland, was selected to be the chief engineer for the project. While the railway was considered a rare collaboration between Jews, Catholics and Protestants, Jewish publications expressed concerns that the line was not serving Jewish interests. A prominent European Jew, H. Gedelah, wrote in the Jewish Chronicle that the line was funded by extreme Orthodox Catholics, and the Hebrew newspaper Havatzalat reported a disappointment that no Jewish backers for the line had been found. When the project ran out of money, Navon secured more funds from investors in Germany, Belgium and Switzerland. However, by 1892 the line's shares dropped below the nominal value. He tried to raise more funds, including from Theodor Herzl, although the latter was not interested and wrote that it was a wretched little line from Jaffa to Jerusalem was of course quite inadequate for our needs. Construction. The groundbreaking ceremony took place on March 31, 1890, in Yazur, attended by the governor of Palestine, Palestine, Ibrahim Haki Pasha, the Grand Mufti of Gaza, Navon, Fruiga, etc. The track was chosen to be of 1,000 mm meter gauge, similarly to French minor railways, and was brought in from France and the Belgian manufacturer Angela. According to the New York Times, the materials for the railroad, as well as the rolling stock, were bought from the Panama Canal Company owned by Ferdinand de Lesseps, although the stamps on the rails suggest that they were created in Belgium, which, according to Anthony S. Travis, disproves the Panama Canal theory. A short 600 mm gauge section, as well as a meter gauge section with a pier, was laid between the port of Jaffa and the Jaffa station to easily transport materials from the harbour to the railway. Engineers were brought from Switzerland, Poland, Italy and Austria, while construction workers were brought mostly from Egypt, Sudan and Algiers. Native Palestinian Arabs were also heavily involved in the work, although many were farmers and worked only during certain seasons. Stonemasons from Bethlehem and Beit Yala helped construction in the Judean hills. Despite receiving medical treatment, a considerable number of workers died of malaria, scurvy, dysentery and other diseases. More died of construction accidents, including the process of cutting through rocks on the approach to Jerusalem. Numerous bridges were built along the line. The shorter ones were of stone, while 6 of the 7 longer ones were iron, supplied by the Eiffel Company. Water for the railway's operation was taken from wells in Jaffa, Ramla and Betir, and a spring at Sefard. Betir also supplied the Jerusalem station with water. The first test run was made on the railway in October 1890, an event that was attended by some 10,000 onlookers, more than half of the population of Jaffa. The locomotive was a Baldwin 260, one of the first 3 built for the line, and carried the American and French flags. The Jaffa-Ramla section was fully open to the public on May 24, 1891, and a further section to Deoban was opened on December 4 of the same year. In Jaffa and Jerusalem, the French Railway Company sought to build the stations as close as possible to the old cities, while the Ottoman authorities prevented them from doing so, resulting the terminus's relative distance from the city centers. Despite this, the land that the stations were built on was purchased at very high prices by the railway company. The first train reached Jerusalem on August 21, but the tracks immediately near the station had not yet been completed. The first passenger trip between the Jaffa and Jerusalem stations took place on August 27. Building the railway was a very ambitious undertaking. Under local conditions, hundreds of tons of rails were brought from Belgique, coal from Britain and rolling stock from France. Unloading these materials in Jaffa's primitive harbour was an immense challenge. A report in Railway magazine of 1902 said, Vail also read that the sleepers were made of oak, laid 50 centimeters apart, and were 22 centimeters wide. The rails weighed 20 kilograms per meter and were fastened to the sleepers with spikes. 1892 to 1914. The line officially opened on September 26, 1892. The length of the journey was approximately 3.5 to 6 hours, about equal to the same trip on a carriage, and contrary to the original plan, which envisioned a 3-hour trip. Even so, the opening event received media coverage worldwide. Joseph Navon, who had already been awarded the French Legion of Honor for his involvement in the railway, received a Turkish medal, and in 1895 or 1896, the title of Bey. In 1892, the railway posted a financial deficit, with daily gains being about 20% lower than the daily construction expenditures. Freight income made up for about 2/3 of the total. The investors and companies involved in the project were facing difficulties, especially Fruitage's bank, which caused the elimination of Navon's investments. Tourist traffic was lower than expected, and maintenance problems arose. The trip time was often extended to 6 hours, which only allowed one train per direction per day. A Jerusalem-Jaffa train left in the morning and returned to Jerusalem in the afternoon. In A Practical Guide to Jerusalem and Its Environs, a guidebook written around the time, E.A. Reynolds Ball wrote, "It requires only an ordinary amount of activity to jump out and pick the flowers along the line, and rejoin the train as it laboriously pants up the steep ascent, a feat I myself have occasionally performed." Quote, in May 1894, in light of all the problems, the Société du Chemin de fer Ottoman de Jaffa and Jerusalem et Prolongements went through a new financing initiative and attracted numerous investors. The reorganization paved way for increased efficiency on the line and tourism increased, although Ottoman restrictions on Jewish land purchase and immigration had a negative effect on traffic. There was also a cholera outbreak that hurt tourism. Freight traffic increased by about 50% between 1893 and 1894. In 1895, improvements were made to the track and a bridge was built in Jaffa that became known as the Shalush Bridge, on the other side of which the Shalush family helped found Neves. The railway became profitable by 1897, however. Seller Merrill wrote in 1898 that the line was in a state of bankruptcy. Moreover, while the traffic from Jaffa to Jerusalem was high, on the way back there were very few passengers and little freight. Theodore Herzl visited Palestine in October 1898 and was not impressed by the Jaffa-Jerusalem railway. He did not consider it important to the Zionist enterprise, although Zalman David Levontin, another Zionist leader, did, and created a plan to purchase the railway in March 1901. Jewish settlement in Palestine benefited the railroad in any case. Baron Edmund de Rothschild funded several villages along the line, which contributed to its financial development. In Jerusalem, Boris Schatz founded an arts and crafts school in 1906 to cater to the tourist souvenir needs. The line showed an overall growth trend between 1896 and World War I, impeded mainly by the sixth cholera pandemic which spread to Palestine in 1902 and again in 1912, and the increasingly nationalistic Ottoman authorities. By 1903, it became clear that more locomotives were needed for the tourist seasons. The railway company ordered a 044 Mallet locomotive from Borsig of Germany in 1904, which entered service in 1905. Two more came in 1908. The last such engine, built in 1914, was likely captured by Britain during the war, and never made it to Palestine. World War I. During the Sinai and Palestine campaign of World War I, the railway was taken over by the Turkish and German armies, which adapted it to serve the needs. The German engineer Heinrich August Meissner was put in charge of its operations, while the Jaffa railway station served as a military headquarters during the war. The Ottomans did not want to expose the railway itself to British naval bombardment. In early 1915, most of the heavy machinery and equipment was moved to Jerusalem, and later in the same year the Jaffa-Lydda section was completely dismantled. Its rails and sleepers were used in the construction of the railway to Beersheba. The Lydda-Jerusalem section was relayed to 1050 mm gauge, and Lydda was connected to the Hejaz Railway via the Eastern Railway and the Tulkarm branch of the Jezreel Valley Railway. When the British advanced northwards in November 1917, the railway was sabotaged by Austrian saboteurs from the retreating Central Powers Army and most of its bridges were blown up. The Turks carried away anything that was movable, from railway cars and wooden rails to parts of the stations. It was however still valuable to the British, as it provided the only viable link from Jerusalem to Egypt, as the roads were in disrepair. Trestle bridges were installed instead of the destroyed iron ones, and the first British train reached Jerusalem on December 27, 1917. In February 1918, a Decauville 600mm gauge railway was built from Jaffa to The, with an extension to the Arya River, the front line at the time. This extension was furthered to the Arab village Al-Jalil, and continued to be used until 1922-23, mainly for transporting construction materials, without locomotives. Another extension was built from the Jaffa station to the port, which operated until 1928. A second Decauville line was constructed in Jerusalem, winding around the mountains close to the Old City, continuing to Al-Bayr in the north. This railway was initiated by General Allenby after a Turkish counter-attack on the British in Jerusalem, who had recently occupied the city. Construction began in May 1918 and completed in September of the same year, by which time it was useless because the front had moved northwards. This short line passed in today's Knesset and Biblical Zoo area. A further narrow gauge extension at 762mm gauge was built by the British from Lydda to Tyre and Lublin, partly adjacent to the existing 1050mm Turkish line. The locomotives used on the railway were converted from 1050mm gauge by the Turks during the war so that they could be used on the entire network. In Palestine, of them, 5 survived the battles: 2 Baldwin 2-6 OS and 3 Borsiga 4-4 OS. Locomotive number 3, Ramla, was badly damaged, although it was repaired using spare parts of the other broken-down engines. It survived until 1930, although it likely remained unused following the end of the war, under the British mandate, because the line was still narrow gauge and incompatible with other British lines. Proposals were brought forward to deliver locomotives and coaches from either the Sudan or Australia. However, the Palestine Military Railways, the British operator now managing the railroad system, decided to rebuild the line to the wider 1435mm standard gauge, an operation that lasted between January 27 and June 15. The final section, between Jaffa and The, was completed in September 1920, and inaugurated in a ceremony attended by Herbert Samuel, the British High Commissioner, on October 5. Between the end of the war and 1920, the railway was used almost exclusively for military purposes. However, food was delivered to Jerusalem by the British authorities shortly after the war ended. In June 1919, a civilian passenger service began operating between Haifa and Jerusalem, and by February 1920, there was an option to travel from Jerusalem to Egypt via transfer at The. During this period, the Zionist movement had demanded rights to the railway from France, as it was not British property. The British countered by asserting that France was Britain's ally during the war. However, all inline civilian operations met with strong French opposition. France disapproved of British civilian control of the mandate. To the French, Britain's answer was that since the original French line was rebuilt, the line was in fact British property. Following years of discussion, in April 1920 the civilian Palestine Railways took over the line. On October 4, 1922, the two sides signed an agreement whereby Britain would compensate the line's original French operators for £565,000, reduced from the original French demand of £1.5 million. The coastal railway now extended from El Khana Kantara to Haifa, intersecting the Jaffa-Jerusalem line with a junction at Lydda. In 1921, a luxury on-demand service was initiated between Jerusalem and Kantara, Egypt, but it was not popular. It was superseded by a more successful luxury service between Kantara and Haifa on the coastal railway.